Kira 7 had been sold 4 times before her 12th cycle, and she had learned that the waiting was always the worst part. She stood on the cold metal platform of Nexus Station's auction house, her thin gray shift doing nothing to protect her from the chill that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. And she kept her eyes fixed on the floor because that was what good property did. The Dominion had very specific rules about such things. Her species, the Valari, had lost a war 3 generations before she was born, and the treaty that ended the bloodshed had reclassified her entire people as service assets, which was a polite way of saying that they could be bought and sold like furniture or livestock. The auction house was not crowded today because Valari were no longer fashionable among the wealthy collectors and merchants who frequented such places, and Kira 7 was grateful for the small mercy of fewer eyes upon Hirsch. He could feel the brands on her arms without looking at them. 4 different symbols burned into her silver-blue skin by 4 different owners, each one a reminder of promises broken and hopes crushed. The first owner had been a Kesari noble who wanted something pretty to stand in the corner of his dining hall. And when Kira 7 had grown too tall and lost the childish features he found appealing, he had traded her away like an outdated decoration. The second had been worse in ways she did not allow herself to remember. Traded her away like an outdated decoration. The second had been worse in ways she did not allow herself to remember. The third had been a mining operation that needed small hands for delicate work, and she still bore the scars on her fingers from the machinery that had torn her skin when she was too slow. The fourth, a Torvan merchant named Krell, had simply grown bored of her after 2 cycles and decided to recoup some of his investment. And so here she stood, waiting to discover what the 5th chapter of her captivity would hold. The auctioneer, a thin Voisin with 4 arms and a voice like grinding metal, was reading from his datapad in a bored monotone, listing her specifications as if she were a piece of equipment. Valari female, approximately 14 cycles standard, trained in domestic service and light manufacturing. Previous owners report adequate compliance and minimal disciplinary requirements. Some cosmetic damage from previous assignments. Starting bid at 300 galactic credits. 300 credits, Kira 7 thought, and she wondered if that was more or less than she had been worth the last time. The bidding was sparse and unenthusiastic. A few merchants calling out numbers without even looking up from their own datapads. And Kira 7 felt a strange numbness settle over her as she watched her future being decided by beings who saw her as nothing more than a line item in their accounts. Then the human. Walked-in humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having made first contact barely 50 standard cycles ago, and most species regarded them with a mixture of curiosity and unease. They were said to be emotional and unpredictable, prone to forming attachments that other species found baffling, and their tendency to interfere in matters that did not concern them had earned them a reputation as troublemakers. This human was a female of middle age by their standards, with dark hair that was streaked with gray and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent squinting at star charts and cargo manifests. She wore the practical clothing of a cargo hauler, nothing fancy or expensive, and she moved through the auction house with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where she was going and did not care who might be watching. The human stopped in front of Kira 7's platform and looked up at her, and something in that gaze made Kira 7's breath catch in her throat. It was not hunger or calculation or the cold assessment of value that she had seen in so many eyes before. The human was looking at her as if she were a person. This one, the human said, a voice cutting through the murmur of the auction house with a clarity that silenced the other conversations. How much to end the bidding now? The auctioneer blinked all 6 of his eyes in surprise and consulted his datapad. Current bid stands at 340 credits. But if you wish to close the auction immediately, a premium of 50% would be required, bringing the total to 510 credits. Done? The human said. And she pulled a credit chip from her pocket and tossed it to the auctioneer. Without haggling or complaint, Kira 7 felt the ownership collar around her neck vibrate briefly as the transfer was processed. And just like that, she belonged to someone new. The human waited while the auctioneer completed the paperwork, signing documents and accepting a small data chip that contained Kira 7's service records and ownership history. And then she turned and walked toward the exit. Without looking back, Kira 7 hurried to follow because that was what property did. The human led her through the crowded corridors of Nexus Station, past merchant stalls and food vendors and the endless flow of beings from 100 different worlds, until they reached a docking bay where a medium-sized cargo vessel waited. The ship was old but well-maintained, its hull marked with the scars of countless journeys through the void. And on its side was painted a name in the angular script of the human language. The human noticed her looking and said, "It is called the weathered oak, which is a type of tree from my homeworld. Strong and stubborn, and more beautiful for having survived the storms." Kira 7 did not know what a tree was, but she nodded anyway, because agreeing with owners was always safer than asking questions. The human turned to face her then, and her expression was difficult to read. "My name is Elena Vasquez, and I am the captain of this vessel. And I need you to understand something before we go any further." Kira 7 braced herself for the list of rules and expectations and punishments that always came with a new owner. Instead, Elena said, "I am not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to make you do anything you do not want to do. And I know you have no reason to believe that right now, but I am asking you to give me a chance to prove it." Kira 7 stared at her, searching for the trick, the trap, the hidden cruelty that surely lurked behind such impossible words. She found nothing but tired sincerity in the human's dark eyes. "Why?" Kira 7 whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Why did you buy me?" Elena Vasquez looked at her for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy with an emotion Kira 7 could not name. "Because I was there, and you needed help, and that is what humans do." She turned and walked up the bore. The cabin was small but clean, with a bed that looked soft and a viewport that showed the endless darkness of space scattered with distant stars. And Kira 7 stood in the doorway for a long time because she was certain it must be some kind of mistake. "This is yours," Captain Elena Vasquez said from behind her. "The door locks from the inside, and no one will enter without your permission. And you can arrange the space however you like." Kira 7 turned to look at the human, searching her face for any sign of deception. Previous owners had played games like this before, offering comfort and kindness only to snatch it away as punishment for some imagined failure, teaching her that hope was just another form of cruelty. "I do not understand," Kira 7 said carefully. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" Elena's expression flickered with something that might have been sadness. "In the bed. That is what it is for. And there are blankets in the storage compartment if you get cold. And the environmental controls are on the wall panel if you want to adjust the temperature." She paused and seemed to be choosing her next words with care. "Dinner is at 1800 hours in the galley, which is down the corridor and to the left. And you are welcome to join us if you are hungry. But there is no obligation." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the corridor. And Kira 7 was alone. She stood in the doorway until her legs began to ache. And then she stepped inside and closed the door and pressed her back against it and slid down to the floor. The bed looked impossibly soft and impossibly dangerous. She slept on the floor that night, curled into a tight ball in the corner, farthest from the door, because the floor was familiar and predictable, and floors did not betray you over the following days. Kira 7 observed and waited for the other shoe to drop. As the humans like to say, the weathered oak had a crew of 7, including Captain Vasquez. And they were the strangest collection of beings Kira 7 had ever encountered. There was Hara, the cook, a massive human male with hands like shovels and a laugh that seemed to shake the walls, who sang off-key while he prepared meals and always made too much food. There was Yuki, the pilot, small and quick and prone to sarcastic comments that made the others groan, who spent her off hours teaching herself to play a stringed instrument with more enthusiasm than skill. There was Marcus, the engineer, quiet and methodical and covered in old scars that he never explained, who talked to the ship's engines like they were beloved pets. There were others too, humans and even a few non-humans, all of them living and working together in a chaos of noise and emotion that should have been terrifying, but somehow was not. They argued constantly about everything from navigation routes to whose turn it was to clean the waste recyclers. And their voices rose and fell in passionate debate that never seemed to end. But they also touched each other. Kira 7 noticed, and this confused her more than anything, a hand on a shoulder in passing, a pat on the back for a job well done, embraces that served no practical purpose and seemed to exist only for the comfort they provided. The crew of the Weathered Oak touched each other like it was natural, like it was necessary, like physical contact was a language all its own. No one touched Kira 7, and she was grateful for that. No one gave her orders either, which was far more disturbing. She kept waiting for work assignments, for duties, for the structure of servitude that had defined her entire existence. But the days passed and no commands came. Finally, after a week of wandering the ship like a ghost, she approached Captain Vasquez in the cockpit. "I do not understand what you want from me," Kira 7 said, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "You have given me food and shelter and asked for nothing in return, and I do not know what I am supposed to do." Elena turned from the navigation console and looked at her with those tired, kind eyes. "You are not supposed to do anything," she said. "You are not here to work or serve or perform. You are here because you needed somewhere to be, and that is enough." "But why?" Kira 7 pressed. Because she needed to understand, needed to find the logic behind this impossible behavior. Why would you spend credits on someone who gives you nothing back? That is not how ownership works. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was careful and sad. "You are right that it is not how ownership works. But I do not own you, Kira. I never did." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip. "This is the manumission paperwork I filed the day after I bought you at the auction. The transaction has already been processed by the Colonial Authority, and according to every legal database in human space, you are a free being." Kira 7 stared at the chip like it might explode. "I do not understand. I bought you so that I could free you," Elena said simply. "Because no one should be property, and because I had the credits and I was there, and I could not walk away and pretend I had not seen you standing on that platform." She held out the chip, and Kira 7 took it with trembling fingers. "You can leave whenever you want," Elena continued. "We stop at stations regularly, and I will give you enough credits to start over somewhere safe. And you never have to see me or this ship again if that is what you choose. And if I stay," Kira 7 whispered, "then you stay because you want to, not because you have to. And that is the only way it works." Kira 7 looked down at the chip in her hand, this tiny piece of technology that contained her freedom, and she felt something crack open in her chest that she had not even known was there. She did not leave. She was not sure yet if she was staying, because she wanted to or because she did not know how to want anything at all. But for the first time in her life, the choice was hers to make. 3 months passed aboard the Weathered Oak, and Kira 7 learned that humans were strange in ways the galaxy had failed to warn her about. They remembered things, small things, things that should not have mattered to anyone. Hauer remembered that she did not like the texture of processed grain, and started making her meals with real vegetables from the ship's tiny hydroponic garden. Yuki remembered that she had mentioned once. Just once, that bright lights hurt her eyes in the morning, and after that, the corridor lights near her cabin were always dimmed until midday. Marcus remembered that she was curious about the engines and began explaining how they worked, patient and thorough, never making her feel stupid for not knowing things that everyone else seemed to take for granted. And Elena remembered everything. One day the captain returned from a supply run at a station with a small device in her hand, and she found Kira 7 in the galley and held it out to her without ceremony. "This is for your cabin," Elena said. "I heard them selling these in the market, and I thought of you." Kira 7 took the device and examined it, and when she pressed the activation button, the cabin filled with the soft sound of water falling on leaves rain. Elena explained. That was what it was called. And on Earth, it happened when water fell from the sky. Kira 7 stood there holding this tiny gift and felt something break inside her that she had not known was still intact. She had mentioned rain once. A single, offhand comment about a story her mother had told her when she was small. A story about the world the Valari had lived on before the conquest. A world where water fell from the sky and made music on the leaves of silver trees. She had not thought anyone was listening. She had not thought it mattered, but Elena had heard. And Elena had remembered. And Elena had seen this device in a market stall and thought of her. Kira 7 began to understand that humans expressed love through such gestures, through remembering and giving and the small acts of witnessed attention. That said, "I see you and you matter." It terrified her more than cruelty ever had. Cruelty she understood. Cruelty had rules and patterns and a logic she could navigate. But kindness was a language she had forgotten how to speak. She started helping in the galley, not because anyone asked, but because she wanted to. Because being useful felt safer. Then being cared for, Jorge welcomed her with enthusiasm and began teaching her Earth recipes. How to chop vegetables and season meat and time the cooking so that everything came together at once. The first time he tasted something she had made on her own and told her it was good, she burst into tears and could not explain why he pretended not to notice and simply handed her a towel and asked if she wanted to learn how to make bread next. Slowly, carefully, like an animal emerging from hiding, Kira 7 began to let herself be part of the crew. She learned their names and their stories, learned that each of them had come to the Weathered Oak from somewhere painful. Yuki had fled debt collectors, who would have sold her into indentured servitude to pay off her family's mistakes. Marcus had left his home colony after an accident in the mines, killed his partner, and no one seemed to care, or he had been a soldier once. Had done things he could not talk about, and had walked away from a war that asked too much of his soul. And Elena had lost a daughter. Her name had been Maria, and she had been 8 years old when a fever swept through their colony, and the medicine that could have saved her existed, but was priced beyond what a cargo hauler could afford. The Dominion controlled the pharmaceutical trade in that sector, and they had decided that profit mattered more than a child's life. Elena did not speak of it often, but sometimes Kira 7 saw her looking at the stars with an expression that held more grief than any words could carry. "Is that why you hate the Dominion?" Kira 7 asked one night, when it was just the two of them in the cockpit watching the stars stream past. "I do not hate anyone," Elena said quietly. "Hate takes too much energy, and I would rather spend that energy on something useful, like buying Valari at auctions." Elena smiled. A small tired smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I have been doing this for a while now, finding our people where I can, filing the papers, helping them find places to start over. There are others who do the same, a network of ships and stations and people who believe that the way things are is not the way things have to be." Kira 7 thought about this for a long moment. "That sounds dangerous." "It is. You could lose everything. Your ship, your license, your freedom." "Yes, Then why do you do it? Elena turned to look at her, and her expression was open and honest and full of something Kira 7 was only beginning to recognize. Because someone has to, and because I can. And because every time I see one of you standing on those platforms with those brands on your skin and that emptiness in your eyes, I see Maria and I cannot walk away. She reached out and took Kira 7's hand, that human gesture that still made her breath catch, and held it gently. You are not a replacement for her. I want you to understand that. You are your own person with your own story, but you are also part of my story now, and I am glad you stayed. Kira 7 looked down at their joined hands, her silver blue skin against Elena's warm brown, and she felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. I am glad too, she whispered, and she meant it. She fell asleep that night with the sound of rain playing in her cabin, and woke without nightmares for the first time she could remember. The Dominion came for them on a cold morning at Kareth Station, and Kira 7 knew, the moment she saw the enforcement vessels, that her borrowed happiness had finally run out. 2 years had passed since Elena had bought her at that auction. 2 years of healing and growing and learning what it meant to be free. And she had allowed herself to believe that maybe the past could stay buried. She had been foolish. 3 warships surrounded the weathered oak before they could even power up their engines. Sleek predatory vessels bristling with weapons. And the station authority made it clear that resistance would not be tolerated. The crew gathered in the cargo bay as armed soldiers boarded, their faces grim but unafraid. And Kira 7 felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the Dominion enforcers spread through the ship like a disease. The commander was a Torvan, tall and imposing with ceremonial scars marking his face, and he walked slowly down the line of crew members with his datapad in hand. Comparing faces to records with cold efficiency, he stopped in front of Kira 7. This one, he said, his translator rendering his words in flat mechanical tones. Registered property of House Vakari, reported stolen 18 standard months ago. Current location matches the tracking beacon embedded in her ownership collar. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the weapons pointed at her chest. She is a free citizen of the Human Colonial Authority, registered and documented. Check the records yourself. The commander made a sound that might have been laughter. Human records mean nothing outside your territory, and we are not in your territory. Captain Vasquez, we are in Dominion space, and Dominion law is very clear on the matter of stolen property. She is not property. The treaty says otherwise. And the treaty has been law for 3 generations. Longer than your species has been part of galactic civilization. He gestured to 2 of his soldiers, who moved toward Kira 7 with restraints in their hands. She is also wanted for questioning regarding a network of thieves and smugglers who have been interfering with legitimate commerce throughout this sector. We have been tracking your activities for some time, Captain. You and your little band of idealists. Kira 7 felt the world narrow down to a single point of clarity. She had known this would happen eventually. Had known that the life she had built was too good to last. Had known that the Dominion did not forget and did not forgive. But she had hoped. She had let herself hope. And now that hope was going to get everyone she loved killed. I will go with you, she said, stepping forward before anyone could stop her, willingly and without resistance. Just leave the crew alone. They were only following orders. I am the one you want. Kira, no. Elena's voice was sharp with something that sounded like fear. It is fine, Kira 7 said. And she turned to face the woman who had saved her, who had freed her, who had taught her what it meant to be loved. And she tried to memorize every line of her face. You gave me 2 years, Captain. 2 years of being a person instead of a thing. And that is more than I ever thought I would have. I am not going to let them take you. You do not have a choice. There are 3 warships out there, and you have 1 cargo hauler. The mathematics are not complicated. She tried to smile, tried to be brave, tried to show Elena that it was worth it, that she was grateful, that these 2 years had been enough. The commander watched this exchange with something like amusement. How touching. But she's right, Captain. There is nothing you can do. The property will be returned to its rightful owners, and you and your crew will be detained for questioning regarding your illegal activities. He raised his hand to signal his soldiers, and then Elena did something that Kira 7 did not expect. She pulled out her communication device, not to call for help from her crew, but to broadcast on an open channel that reached every ship and station in the sector. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Human Colonial Authority vessel, the Weathered Oak. And I am declaring this individual, Kira of the Valari, to be a member of my family under HCA Charter, Article 7. Section 12. The commander's translator sputtered as it tried to process her words. Any attempt to remove her from my custody, Elena continued, a voice ringing with an authority that seemed to fill the cargo bay, constitutes an act of aggression against a human citizen and will be treated as such by the full weight of human diplomatic and military response. You cannot just declare someone family, the commander said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. She is not even human. Family is not about blood, Elena said. And her eyes never left his. It is about choice. And I choose her. The communication device in the commander's hand began to chirp with incoming messages. First one, then a dozen, then too many to count human ships throughout the sector were responding. Cargo haulers and passenger transports and even a few military escorts. All of them demanding to know what was happening. All of them making it clear that they were watching. You are bluffing, the commander said. But he did not sound certain anymore. Try me, Elena said. And there was something in her voice that Kira 7 had never heard before. Something fierce and unbreakable and utterly human. Take her. And find out what happens when you make an enemy of every human in this part of the galaxy. The standoff lasted 6 hours in the end. The Dominion withdrew, not because they had changed their minds about property rights or the legitimacy of human law, but because the cost of one Valari servant was not worth the economic disruption of a trade war with the humans. The mathematics had changed. Kira 7 stood in the cargo bay and watched the enforcement vessels pull away. And she could not quite believe that it was over, that she was still here, that Elena had risked everything and won. You called me family, she said. And her voice was barely a whisper. Elena turned to her with tears streaming down her face. The first tears Kira 7 had ever seen her shed. You have been family for a long time, she said. I should have told you sooner. And then she opened her arms. And Kira 7 stepped into them, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to belong. The night after the Dominion withdrew, Kira 7 sat alone in her cabin with the rain device playing softly in the background. And she tried to understand what had happened. She had been prepared to die. Or worse, to go back to the life she had escaped. And instead she was still here, still free. Still surrounded by people who cared whether she lived or died. It did not feel real. Elena found her there, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, and she did not say anything at first. Just lowered herself down to sit beside her. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people breathing together in the small space. And Kira 7 found comfort in the silence. You could have lost everything, she finally said. Your ship, your crew, your trade licenses, your freedom. Everything you have built. You could have lost it all for me. Yes, Elena agreed. Then why? Elena was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft and careful. Do you remember when I told you about Maria? Kira 7 nodded. When she died, I thought that was it for me. I thought I would never have a family again. That part of my life was over, and for a while I just existed, going through the motions, hauling cargo from one station to another. not really living. She paused and took a deep breath. And then I started finding people like you. People who had been thrown away by a galaxy that did not see their worth. And I realized that family is not just what you were born into. Family is what you built. She turned to look at Kira 7, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You are my family. Kira, you have been since the day you decided to stay. And I would burn down the entire Dominion before I let anyone take you from me. Kira 7 felt the words wash over her like warm water. And something that had been locked tight in her chest finally broke open. She had spent her whole life learning to expect cruelty, learning to protect herself by wanting nothing and needing no one. And here was this stubborn human woman offering her the one thing she had never dared to hope for. I do not know how to do this, she whispered. I do not know how to be family. No one ever taught me. That is okay, Elena said. And she reached out to take her hand. We will figure it out together. The next morning, Kira 7 joined the crew for breakfast in the galley. And something was different. Jorge hugged her without warning, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. And Yuki punched her arm and called her little sister. And Marcus nodded at her with more warmth in his eyes than she had ever seen. They had heard what Elena said, all of it. And they had accepted it without question, because that was what family did. The years that followed were not easy. The Dominion had long memories and did not forgive the humiliation of backing down. And the Weathered Oak found itself blacklisted from dozens of stations and trade routes. But the network that Elena had built was stronger than any one ship. And for every door that closed, 2 more opened. And the work continued. Kira 7 became part of it, learning to navigate the underground channels where information and resources flowed, helping to coordinate the rescue and relocation of Valari, who had been trapped in servitude. She discovered that she had a talent for strategy, for seeing patterns and possibilities that others missed. And Elena began relying on her more and more as the years passed. She also discovered love. His name was Thomas, a human pilot from Elena's network. And he was funny and kind and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When she told him about her past, about the brands on her skin and the years of servitude and the emptiness she still carried inside her, he listened without judgment and then told her that none of it changed how he felt. They were married on a small station in human space, with the crew of the Weathered Oak as witnesses. And Elena cried through the entire ceremony. Their daughter was born 2 years later, a hybrid child with silver blue skin and dark curly hair. Proof that the boundaries between species were not as fixed as the Dominion wanted everyone to believe. They named her Maria, after the sister she would never meet. And Elena held her in her arms and wept with joy. The years turned into decades. The Weathered Oak grew old and was eventually retired, replaced by newer ships crewed by a new generation of rescuers and idealists. Elena grew old too, her hair turning white and her steps growing slower. But her spirit never dimmed. She saw the network she had built grow from a handful of ships to a movement that spanned dozens of systems, saw the first Valari colony established in human-protected space, saw the treaty that had enslaved her daughter's people begin to crumble under the weight of galactic opinion. She did not live to see it abolished entirely, but she died knowing that the end was coming. Kira 7 was holding her hand when she passed, in the small cabin that had once been her own, with the rain device playing softly in the background. Thank you, Elena whispered with her last breath, for letting me be your family. And then she was gone 12 years later. Kira 7 stood before a memorial on New Valar, the first free world her people had known in generations. The memorial listed 847 names, each one representing a soul who had passed through the network Elena had built. Valari, who had been bought and freed and given the chance to choose their own destinies. Her own daughter stood beside her, Maria, now a young woman with her grandmother's stubborn spirit and her mother's silver skin. Was great-grandmother really as brave as the stories say? Maria asked. Braver, Kira 7 said. And she smiled at the memory. She faced down 3 warships with nothing but a communication device, and her own stubborn conviction that what was right mattered more than what was safe. Is that why humans are so scary to the Dominion? Kira 7 laughed. And it was a sound full of love and loss and gratitude. Humans are not scary. Little one, they are just very good at loving things. And they do not stop fighting for what they love. She reached out and touched Elena's name on the memorial. Traced the letters with her fingers. Elena Vasquez. The inscription read, Captain, Mother. The one who called us family. The humans had a saying that blood was thicker than water. But they also knew that the full truth was more complicated. That the bonds you chose were sometimes stronger than the bonds you were born with. Elena had taught her that, and now Kira 7 would teach the galaxy. She took her daughter's hand and walked away from the memorial, toward the settlement where the next generation of free Velari was learning what it meant to live without chains. Behind her, the memorial stood silent in the sunlight, bearing witness to the woman who had changed everything with a single word, family. It was, Kira 7 thought, the most powerful word in any language, and it had started with one stubborn human who refused to look away.